I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference and the previous speakers for already telling us very much about what I personally consider a very interesting topic. And I will now tag on some of my own remarks concerning the goddess Padmavati in Karnataka. Now, as has already been mentioned, Caleb Siddons spoke about it in some detail. The goddess Padmavati is associated with a number of royal dynasties in Karnataka. Jainism, so it seems, was the first established high religion in that part of India. And the goddess Padmavati is associated with a number of dynasties. Just as Jainism played a role in the establishment of dynasties such as the Chalukyas, the Rashtrakutas, the Gangas, all of them have been mentioned. Also the Santaras, who had their center in Ambuja, about which I'll speak presently. The goddess Padmavati also plays a role in the founding myth of the mighty Hoysala dynasty. The founder, Sala, as a young man, was attacked by a tiger, so the story goes. And his guru, a Jaina monk, told him to strike the tiger with a staff in self-defense with the words Hoysala, which, so the story says, is the source of the name Hoysala for the dynasty. So Sala did that, and it turned out that the goddess Padmavati had assumed the form of the tiger so as to put his courage to the test. Scroll down, yes. Here we have a traditional depiction of the goddess as found in this part of India. And when I first wrote about the worship of Jaina goddesses in general some 30 years ago, many of my readers were puzzled. Common reaction was to dismiss the entire phenomenon as not genuine Jainism, because it seemed to contradict some fundamental Jaina ideas. It was assumed to be something fundamentally alien, an import from Hinduism, whatever that may mean. This judgment seems to be supported by several critical authors, modern as well as classical. On the other hand, as the contemporary Muni Kuntasagara has noted, numerous classical authors not only approved, but actively encouraged the practice of Yakshi worship. In theory, there are at least 24 Yakshis, as the goddesses of Jainism are usually called, together with their 24 male counterparts, the Yakshas, and they are considered attendants of the 24 Tirthapuras. For reasons that are not yet clear, only 3 among these 24 are widely worshipped in Karnataka. They have very clearly different personalities, and therefore they attract different kinds of devotees. Padmavati worship is spread throughout Karnataka, and popular shrines dedicated to her are found in many locations. But there's unanimity that her main shrine is found in Ambuja, about which Mrs. Nandagopal already spoke, in central Karnataka. Ambuja is a small village that once was the capital of the very long-lived Santara dynasty. The town has had many names in the course of its long history, from Patipamburcha Nagara to Pobulcha to Kombucha to Ambuja, the name which today is the most commonly used among the Jainas, to modern Umcha. And here you have the main temple dedicated to the goddess. The main temple of Padmavati in Ambuja was built in the year 1062 CE by Trailokya Santara, almost the same time when Madhisena Suri, also in Karnataka, wrote his tantric text Bhairava Padmavati Kalpa. But this temple in Ambuja was not the first to be constructed and dedicated exclusively to Padmavati in Karnataka. A stone inscription tells us that in approximately 490 CE, Ravi Varma, a ruler of the nebulous Kadamba dynasty, also already mentioned in the previous talk, he had a temple constructed for Padmavati in the village of Khaleri in southwestern Karnataka. Several old Padmavati temples have been taken over in the course of time by various other religious communities. This is said to be the case with the famous Mahalakshmi temple in Kolhapur in Maharashtra, the Sharadamba temple in Sringeri, and most notoriously the Renuka Yellama Devi Devasthana in Saundatti, which is now dedicated to the goddess Yellama and is known as a center of the notorious Devadasi practice, which now is claimed to have been eradicated. The most popular story about Padmavati that is told in Karnataka explains how the goddess came to Kombucha. And in outline, the story is as follows. The kingdom of Madhura in northern India is ruled by a king named Sakara, whose only queen, Shriyala Devi, is from the other Madhura, namely Madurai in the deep south of India. By the grace of Padmavati, their son Jinadatta is born. Many years later, the king falls in love with the daughter of a savage tribal chieftain, and he marries her. The people of Mathura are so shocked about this second marriage that the king must ask and receive the forgiveness of the Muni Siddhanta. He also decides to abdicate in favor of his son Jinadatta. Under the influence of this second savage wife, the previous king, cultivates base habits such as eating meat. The second wife wants to kill Jinadatta in favor of her own son, but the plot fails and her own son is killed instead. Jinadatta feels utterly unsafe in Mathura, and therefore he decides to flee southwards to his uncles in the southern Mathura, and he takes the murti of the goddess Padmavati with him. Here you have a picture of the interior of the Padmavati temple of Kombucha. This is an ordinarily busy day, and here you have a picture of the murti. So he flees southward with the murti, but halfway south, in the middle of a forest, the goddess tells him not to go any further. A group of tribal hunters accepts him as their king, and on the spot they begin building the capital of a new kingdom. The goddess also gives him advice on how to be a good ruler, and in order to finance the new kingdom, she says that if base metals are touched to her murti, these will be turned into gold. Later, Jinadatta's mother and the Muni Siddhantakirti join him in the new city of Kombucha. His mother insists that he should marry his two cousins from the southern Mathura. Then again, many years later, Jinadatta angers the goddess by an act of ingratitude. He has two nose ornaments made from two pearls that were given to him by a fisherman. And he decides to give the larger, more beautiful ornament to his younger wife. Padmavati obviously thinks this is very ungrateful in view of everything that she has done for him. And she says so to him in a dream. But she also says that in this Panchamakala, this Kali Kala, such weaknesses are common, and he is just a victim of circumstances. However, her magical murti will disappear. It will vanish in a well. And instead of this image, a stone image of her will appear in the temple. This happens after some time. Jinadatta abdicates in favor of his son. He himself becomes a monk, and both his wives become nuns. Now, the story of Jaina has found its official, so to say, form, its most elaborate form, in a long narrative poem titled the Jainadatta Raya Charitra, also called Padmavati Mahatmya, by the poet Padmavati, written in 1680 CE. There are also popular modern versions. And the story has also inspired a number of folk songs. There are also lullabies that are sung in central Karnataka, in which the child that is sung to sleep is told to be like Jainadatta, who was protected by the goddess as long as he led a virtuous life. Some stories show quite different sides of the goddess. As in a folktale that was told to me and is also recorded in this book, which is the largest, most important study of Jaina folk literature by S.P. Padmaprasad. And the story I'm referring to, Padmavati of the Cave, Guhya Padmavati, goes as follows. It takes place in a different place, in Shravanabelguna. And one day, a young shepherd is herding his sheep near this hillock. And one of the sheep runs off through a crevice in the side of the hillock. The shepherd creeps in after the sheep into a cave and grabs the sheep by its tail. But the sheep insists to pull the shepherd further into the cave. Passing through 9 doorways, the sheep and shepherd finally reach a large room where he sees the goddess seated on a golden swing that hangs from silver chains, and he's gripped with fear. The goddess tells him not to be afraid, because she will show him the way out, but on the condition that he will tell nobody that she is there. And if he does tell anyone, she says, his head will burst. She also gives him 3 stones, which at home he must place in his 3 containers for ragi, rice, and money. And if he does a simple puja for these 3 stones every day with an incense stick, he will become a wealthy man. And so it happens. People wonder where all his wealth comes from. And they put him under extreme pressure to tell them, but he pretends not to know. His wife, however, does not give up. He tells her that his head will burst if he tells her, but still she insists. He relents, tells her, and promptly his head bursts and he dies. Now, every year on the day Phalguna Krishna Paksha Ashtami, according to the Indian lunar almanac, the Mula Nakshatra day, the great car festival in honor of Padmavati takes place in Abuja. This is usually in the month of March or April. This year it's April 3rd. And it's followed by a Mahabhisheka with 108 kalashas for Parshvanatha on the following day. This annual temple festival lasts for 9 days altogether. Approximately 18 to 20,000 people will come to this small village on this occasion, mainly from the surrounding area, but also from other parts of Karnataka, other parts of India, as far away as Manipur, and also from places like New Zealand and the United States. On the final evening of the car festival, many people crowd around a decorated manastamba in front of the temple. In the general manner of Indian car festivals, the presence of the goddess has been transferred from her main murti in the temple to a portable Utsava murti, which has been carried to and placed in the temple Ratha, the car, and pulled in procession through the village. And after the car with the goddess returns to the temple in the evening, the main priest takes the Utsava murti from the Ratha and proceeds to the manastamba. A traditional 8-fold veneration of the goddess follows, consisting of 8 circumambulations of the manastamba, during which 8 musical performances are offered. The performers circumambulate walking backwards, facing the goddess who, carried by the main priest, you see that in the right-hand side of the picture, follows. After the 8th offering, it is time for the goddess to return to the temple. Against the background of loud music by all the musicians, the priest begins to tremble in a trance. He tries to enter the temple, but he's not in full control of his movements. After several attempts, he succeeds in entering the temple and rushing into the main hall. To the entrance of the Garbhagriha, where other priests take the Utsava Murti from him, and he is dragged off to the side exit of the temple, where he is fanned and resuscitated. Behind the curtains of the Garbhagriha, the other priests ritually transfer the presence of the goddess back to the main Murti. Then the curtain is opened and a grand arati is performed. And most of the people who attend the festivities are not Jainas. They are followers of other religions from Ambuja and the neighboring area. And it is clear for them that it is not Parshvanatha Swami, but his attendant Yakshi, Padmavati, who is the central personality of the 9-day celebrations. We also find Padmavati in places where Parshva has little or no role at all to play. For instance, here in the Bandari Basadi of Shravanabelguna. In a corner, there's this shrine, and you can see by the picture over the doorway who is there. This is the Padmavati shrine and is very much frequented. Also in other towns of religious significance, we see this, such as in Dharmasthala, also in southwestern Karnataka. It's an important multi-religious place of pilgrimage. And on a hillock on the edge of the town, there stands an old but recently very radically renovated Chandranatha temple. Architecturally, it is quite clear who the main personality in the temple is. However, typically, there is an auxiliary shrine within the Garbhagriha of this temple, and it is here, hidden to the left part, in the left part of this section. And if you want to know what is there, which Murti is there, looking at a right angle across the hall, you have to go to the side of the building, which is decorated in here. See, it is very decorated. If you look through this doorway, you will see this. And here we have close up. Those who are familiar with the iconography of Padmavati will already have recognized this image. So we are dealing here with a very small Murti of Padmavati, which attracts very great interest from many visitors. I witnessed a large festival in Dharmastana where the Jaina populace decided it was appropriate to purify also this temple. And Padmavati played a big role. I was also able to make a few short videos. I hope that I'll be able to show one when I'm finished. Here you see the Utsava Murti of Padmavati carried on the head of one of the temple priests in presence of a number of dignitaries. Various offerings are made. And this priest also, after a while, is possessed, and we see similar scenes as one sees every year in Ambuja. Now, Padmavati is, so to say, a largely independent deity in her own right. And the reasons for her popularity become clear when one learns for what reasons she is propitiated. Padmanabha Jaina, our late colleague in Berkeley, told me long ago that his mother had named him after the poet because, like Jinadatta, he also was a boon from the goddess in Ambuja. Several inscriptions testify that various ruling families in the Kannada-speaking region of India considered themselves to be Padmavati Labdavara Prasararu, or blessed by the boons that were granted by Padmavati Devi. Now, many earlier authors on the subject of Yaksha and Yakshi worship have spent much time and effort discussing questions of the origins of the practice of Yakshi worship. And usually they were eager to assert that Yakshi worship in Jainism was a mere borrowing from Hinduism. One very popular assumption among modern scholars is that the practice arose in response to the rise of bhakti religiosity in varieties of Vaishnavite or Shaivite Hinduism to serve the emotional needs of the common people. But there are a few problems with this assumption. First of all, there's the historical difficulty that the earliest traces of Yaksha worship in Jainism are clearly much older than the upsurge of popular Bhakti Hinduism that started from Tamil Nadu around 600 CE. Secondly, if it is objected that the place and function of Yakshi worship in Jainism does not fit in with the Jaina, basically atheist worldview, with its emphasis on ethics and renunciation, and that therefore Yakshi worship must be Hindu, quote unquote, in origin, then one is using a very vague concept of Hinduism indeed. Rather than wondering what one doctrinally codified religion borrowed from which other one, I believe another question is far more interesting and important. Why should anything be borrowed at all? What is the meaning of a story like the one of Padmavati and Cave? What is the point of integrating the worship of a goddess like Padmavati in a religion like Jainism, in which its foremost religiously exemplary personalities are world renouncers who seek to free the essence of their being from the travails of common life in samsara? I believe that this question in itself already provides at least half of the answer. The fact is that we experience the travails of samsara. And as long as we have not attained moksha, we must find ways of dealing with them. Indian religious and philosophical thought has, throughout its very long history, had a very open attitude towards phenomena which in the West we commonly call parapsychological, paranormal, or occult. Padmavati is very strongly associated with such matters. Ways of paranormal cognition have, from very early times onwards, been recognized as valid means of knowledge in Indian philosophy. For instance, in Jainism as Avadijnana, Manaparyaya Jnana, Kevala Jnana, or as Yogi Pratyaksha in Vaishnavite thought. And in my view, the stories about Padmavati seem to be reports of experiences with a not entirely mundane realm. Call it a paramundane realm of experience, which cannot be expressed in mundane terms, but only in symbolic ones. The scanty mention of yakshas in the earliest Jaina literature, in Jaina agamas, and the relatively far more elaborate treatment of them and of similar beings in the Tattva Sutra, chapter 4, from probably the 2nd century AD, are evidence that from very early time onwards, Jaina thinkers have recognized and not summarily dismissed such experiences. Questions like, is Padmavati actually nothing but a Jainified version of the Hindu Manasa or of Kali, in my view, are not appropriate. Now, I can imagine that we are dealing with a symbolic meta-language by which people within the Jaina tradition try to come to terms with certain experiences of phenomena that are shared with people outside that tradition. Therefore, there is also a shared symbolism. This would explain what we read in, say, the Padmavati Sahasranama, where we have the 1008 names of Saraswati, and they include many of the names which have already been mentioned in earlier talks, which we associate with so-called Hindu goddesses. And therefore, Padmavati or Saraswati, or any of the other so-called lower deities, is not borrowed from Hinduism, nor vice versa. They belong to an ancient realm of experience that is pre-philosophical, pre-doctrinal, and has a degree of universality that is recognized across Indian denominational boundaries. And for this reason, there is also nothing reprehensible about nominal Hindus who come to Ombuja, for instance, or other kshetras to seek the blessings of the goddess, because we are dealing here with the same phenomena, only under different names. This is considered perfectly normal, natural, and good. And the non-Jaina pilgrims to Ombuja and to the other kshetras for Kushmandini Devi, for Jwalamalini Devi are very heartily welcomed by the Jaina priesthood. I think that to academically understand Yakshi worship, we must, of course, rely on philology, we must rely on fieldwork, but also on disciplines which until now have not received so much attention from our circles, like cognitive science or depth psychology. And with this, I see I've taken more time than was allotted to me. On the one hand, I'm very happy that I could be here, that I heard the other speakers, that I could tell you something. But on the other hand, I must confess it is extremely frustrating to tell something about such an interesting topic within 20 minutes. And I gather from your reaction that I'm not alone in this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Caleb and Nenu, we could just come up and respond, because I know there are questions. Following that, we will group into three cars. So I want to start with the question regarding the video. And when I was in Karnataka many years ago, I witnessed a festival not unlike that, where there was possession and the breaking of 108, or was it 500 coconuts representing the former slaying of animals to propitiate Daksha Brahma. And I'm wondering if this grammar, this sort of logic of ritual is pan-Karnataka. And I guess Chudamani is there also.
Shall I answer?
Yeah, if you could.
My impression is we have these overlaps.
Yeah.
And what we have in this particular case, what I showed you in this video from Masala, is an overlap with another variety of religiosity in that corner of Karnataka. It's called Bhutaradhane, so the worship of Bhutas, spirits.
Yeah.
And just seeing clearly externally the movements of the priests, it looks very much like the kinds of possession that we see in Bhutaradhane. Is this something un-Jaina? Again, my answer is no. It's an overlap. And these are people, and they can be Jaina people or non-Jaina people, who are trying to deal with a certain realm of experience, and they will share methods for that.
Wonderful. Chudamani, I wonder if you might have some observation. We need you to unmute.
In Dharmasthala, you must be knowing that the Hegade, who is the Dharmadhikari, is a Jain. And he He is the Dharmadhikari for the whole Dharmasthala, which is a Shaiva Kshetra, Shaivism. So it is such a kind of, amalgamation and we have seen that, there is no dispute and no controversy in their, if you visit Dharmasthala, Hegadeji, who is Jain, and he, in the audience hall, he sits there, and the people of any, community, they just come and offer him, and even there are disputes which are not settled by the court. They just stand before him, and both the, the sides, they accept whatever he says. So that's the kind of, the religiosity and their belief and the strength of what Hegadeji, carries in the whole area. It is not only in Dharmasthala, whole of Karnataka respects him. He is a Jain, but he is, Dharmadhikari of the Shaiva Kshetra. So that kind of, we don't find that kind of, the 2 or 3 communities coming together, or as he was mentioning about the Bhutaradhana. In Bhutaradhana process, all are equal. And even a Brahmin will become most insignificant before the Bhuta. Bhuta is the downtrodden, the least, the community he comes from. So he becomes the Bhuta, and whatever he speaks, the entire place accepts, including a powerful Brahmin there. So this is what we see, particularly the coastal Karnataka. There are no disputes.
We brought that up because
such things are not.
Dharmasthala is an absolutely fascinating place.
Yes.
And I have immense respect and admiration for Dr. Hegadeji, who's the Dharmadhikari, who continues this tradition where you have the Jaina Dharmadhikari, who's in charge of the Shaiva temple. And in the Shaiva temple, the main priests are Madhva Vaishnavas from Ludwig. So everything comes together here.
Yes.
And I think this is a beautiful example of how people, irrespective of what nominally their denomination is, they can come together for a common cause. They want to deal with certain questions and certain forces that are beyond their control. And they want to communicate with them. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Shaiva or a Vaishnava or a Jaina, or if there are even certain jobs in Dharmasthala that are reserved for Muslims. It doesn't matter where you're from. There's a place for everybody, and everyone is welcome. I think that's beautiful.
Bennu, would you like to check in on this a little bit?
Yes, of course. This is something, first I'll start with something very personal experience and observation for my own country, India. That I think goddess temple, any goddess temple in India will be the only place where there's no contest or conflicts over, people visiting from different tradition or religious tradition. So that is quite what Dr. Zydenbos was talking about. Since we are already talking about lots of historical things, but I would like to point out two, three things that I observed during my first visit. That first of all, what Dr. Zydenbos was concluding with that the pre-doctrinal phenomena, that is something. And that what I found with my interviews that they're not able to express why they need a goddess, and why that should be any conflicting or paradoxical reason that we should not have a goddess in Jainism, which is very different from a Jina. So they were like Shakti, so they could not make even a full sentence. Shakti, Mata, Mother, Mummy, and we need that. So that was, and then you have to keep on asking questions. So that was coming out. That was very basic psychology and sociology, I would say, that was coming out. The second thing that when I introduced some of the very renowned sadhus like ascetics, Jain ascetics in Ahmedabad, two very prominent ones within the proximity of like 2 miles, they both had very different opinion about Padmavati. One accepted the authority and Bhakti to Padmavati and said like she can bring in liberation, the other were denied. Say that no, that is, and I know that they both share the visitors, the same visitors. So I think that is, I'm also going in the same line, exploring the very psychological and phenomenological need to have a mother. And the literature that I am working on, it's actually kind of an attempt to rationalize their own needs. And I think the Jains in Gujarat, most of them, they are unaware of the historical beginning in the south and all that. So I think that was my point. And I also wanted to ask you the question that did you notice that when they do the puja of Padmavati, they do not use this finger, but they use the thumb
Oh.
to distinguish between that this is for the Jaina and this is for
We use this one for
unliberated deities. And one fascinating thing that I'm going to bring out as a like major argument in my dissertation is that she represents the concept of personal chosen deity, concept of bhakti. I have seen several Jain devotees visiting temple just for the Padmavati and they do not care for it. So this like, I think that bhakti very concept of we are trying to theorize bhakti and John Cott has written for the Jain bhakti and there are like thousands of research on bhakti and Hinduism represent that it's a chosen deity. It's about personalized chosen deity. And I think Padmavati stands for that. So those who love Padmavati will go for her only to the temple. And I think that's a very low conclusion, your reflections on something that I am right now working with. And I see that in the replies of my interviews. So.
Really, the reaction that he said people need this, they need this in TV. But what exactly is the nature of their need?
Yeah.
And I spoke with a Jaina Shastri about these Kshetras. And I asked him, why is this a Padmavati? Why is Simulaga Jana? Why is Shabadal? And his response to that was that at some point in time, there has been some insensitive person who senses things which other people do not sense so easily. And he senses something. This is something that still continues today. People who do this. And these sensitive people who are recognized as such and respected in the community, they will say, for instance, in this spot, there is a presence. There is something here.
Yes.
And I identify this something with Brahmayaksha
Yeah.
or Janamani or Janamani. And there's that presence and certain character, which for these people who identify these presences can be identified by means of the story. And this is why we notice especially in the folklore, in the folk tales about the goddesses, that these, I mentioned that very briefly, two briefly. The goddesses have different personalities. And that is why a certain shape, a spot that becomes a shape, attracts a particular kind of devotees, because people are attracted to that kind of a personality. And this personality for these devotees has meaning. Because the devotees can say, this is how I can imagine a divine force. It must behave like this. I believe in that, and I can respond to that. Therefore, I will go to Karnataka, and so I think it's not so much that we need this particular goddess. It is that people need some way of relating to these, I call them paramundane realities. And the tradition is given it means realities. And it can be Padmavati, can be something.
Certainly. So I have identified three temple kshetras in Ahmedabad, in the vicinity of Ahmedabad, and one of them is the Veer Vijay Pashraya. Veer Vijayji used to worship Padmavati, and that was she was her personal lady, and she used to come and dance for him with wearing the bell anklets. And the story still goes on that if you are a real devotee, we listen to her anklets and bells several times. And many Jain Shvetambara Murti Puja sadhus who stay in that upashraya just because they want to experience Padmavati's anklet bells. So that Kshetra thing in the similar way, Shankheshwara story, in the similar way, if you meet the puja person who is the main bhakti singer in Shankheshwara and not anyone else, then he has a lot more stories of Padmavati than the Shankeshwar Bhagwan himself. Then the Naroda Patiya temple is also that because of the temple was saved. Another very interesting story of Veer Vijay is that when there was a cholera pandemic sort of like thing, in that he used the water blessed by Padmavati to cure the Ahmedabad region, and that was the breaking point why Padmavati is so famous in Ahmedabad. So I could gather that the entire story in like I worked so hard, reaching to the point that I wanted to know why she became so popular in Gujarat. She comes from southern parts of India. What was the breaking point then? So this is one of the conclusions. So these stories are the stories that make faith alive, I think. The belief system is developed, it counts. And when you read the Jains, they gather the theological rationals, they gather their personal convincing rationals to make this whole entire experience possible.
Okay,
Okay.
I invite Padmavati fans to go to the band so we can keep this conversation going. And that would be 8. And then I invite 2 other cars to group themselves. Mayura Restaurant at the corner of Motor and Venice.